At dinner, my twin brother got a standing ovation for his engagement, and I got laughed at for being the family disappointment. What happened next changed everything. By the end of that night, I walked away, and this time, I didn't look back. Stay with me, because what came after? They never saw it coming. At dinner, my twin brother stood up and announced his engagement. The room burst into cheers, claps, and proud tears. I smiled. Genuinely, I mean, we've had our differences, but he's still my twin. I was happy for him. Then my father stood, beer in hand, his voice slurred just enough to make me brace for impact. He looked straight at me and laughed loudly. Finally, one son who isn't a complete disappointment. Unlike this pathetic excuse who couldn't even keep a wife. Everyone laughed, not a few nervous chuckles, full, open laughter, like a punchline had just been delivered. Then my mother chimed in, calm and cold. Honestly, we should have just chosen one embryo. We always knew which one would fail. And just like that, the room erupted again, my nieces, my nephews, even people who barely knew me, laughing, pointing. My brother just stood there, wearing this smug little grin, like he was proud to be the favorite. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream or cry. I simply smiled, one of those empty, almost peaceful smiles, and quietly stood up. I pulled $40 from my wallet, placed it on the table for my share of dinner, and walked out. No dramatic exit, no confrontation, just gone. Outside, the night was freezing, but the silence felt warm compared to the noise I just left behind. The night I finally let go. By the time I reached my car, the messages had already started rolling in. The screen lit up like a slot machine, text after text from my so-called family. Mom, don't be so sensitive. It was just a joke. Dad, man up and come back inside. Paul, bro, chill. It wasn't that deep. My sister, why do you always have to ruin Paul's moment? I just stared at the screen. For the first time in my life, something inside me didn't just break, it clicked. Like a switch flipping in my brain. And in that moment, I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel angry. I felt done. That night, I blocked every single person in my family, phone, social media, everything. The only one I kept was my cousin Marissa. She wasn't at the dinner. And she's always been the only one who treated me like an actual human being. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I sat on the couch with a blanket and silence. The peace felt strange, like I'd been holding my breath for 36 years and finally exhaled. The next morning, I started fresh. My lease was ending soon anyway. So I found a new apartment. Changed my number, deleted my old email. It felt like slipping out of a costume I never wanted to wear in the first place. According to Marissa, the family didn't even notice I was serious until 2 weeks later. They just assumed I was being dramatic, as usual. But this time, I wasn't bluffing. I was gone. And I won't lie, it felt good. For the first time in my adult life, my shoulders weren't hunched with dread. I wasn't mentally preparing for passive-aggressive comments or guilt trips. I had space, real space, to breathe, think, exist. Even my therapist, who I started seeing after the divorce, noticed, "You've made more progress in the last month than in the 6 before." That's what she told me. And maybe she's right. Because for once, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was just letting it be broken. The golden twin's shine starts to fade. 6 weeks passed. No contact, no messages, no noise. It was peaceful, eerily peaceful, like walking through a forest after a storm, when the world feels both still and unfamiliar. I never realized how much mental bandwidth I burned just preparing myself for family gatherings. Group texts, or those awful guilt-ridden birthday calls. Without them in my life, it was like I got a piece of myself back that I didn't even know was missing. And while I was finding peace, Marissa started feeding me updates, little breadcrumbs from the chaos I'd left behind. Apparently, Paul, the golden child, the perfect twin, was cracking under pressure. The big promotion he'd been bragging about for months? Gone. Fell through without warning. The picture-perfect house on his Instagram? Turns out it was a financial illusion. They were drowning in debt. Caitlin's ring hadn't even been fully paid off. The engagement party? Postponed. No real reason given. Just quietly pushed back like a deadline no one wants to talk about. And me? I was finally focusing on myself. I hit the gym for the first time in years. Started reconnecting with old friends, people my family used to belittle, mock, or warn me about. They're not serious people, my mom used to say. Turns out, those not serious people showed up for me more than my blood ever did. I even started a side project I'd been putting off for years. Something small, something just mine, custom gear I designed and sold online. First week, I made $50. 2 weeks later, I hit 1,000. It wasn't about the money. It was about proving to myself that I could build something without their input. without their judgment, without their approval. Then, last week, Marissa called again. "They're asking about you nonstop," she said. "My parents, Paul, even my sister, they'd started to panic. Not because they missed me. Not because they regretted anything. But because they needed something." Marissa didn't know what yet. Just that it was urgent. And suddenly, for the first time in a long time, I wasn't filled with dread. I was curious. When the mask started to slip. It had been over a month since I vanished from the family radar when Marissa texted me out of the blue. "Can we meet for coffee? It's about Paul." At first, I hesitated. I was worried she'd turned into a messenger. A flying monkey, sent by my parents to lure me back into the circus. But Marissa had never played those games. She'd always been the one person in my life who saw through the noise. We met at this tiny cafe near my new place. Nothing fancy, just chipped mugs, scratched tables, and the kind of quiet that feels like a warm blanket. Marissa looked tired, like bone-deep exhausted. She barely sat down before blurting out the truth. Paul's life was falling apart. The week after I cut contact, Caitlin found texts on his phone from not one, not two, but 3 different women, and these weren't ancient flings. They were fresh, recent, ongoing. She was crushed. The engagement wasn't officially off, not yet, but the party had been cancelled. And her parents were livid. Apparently, they'd already put down deposits for venues, photographers, the whole fairy tale. Now, they were stuck in this limbo. Too proud to call it quits. Too angry to pretend everything was fine. And that wasn't even the worst of it. Marissa leaned in, lowered her voice. "Your dad's business? It's in serious trouble." I blinked. My dad, Mr. Untouchable, Mr. Provider, Mr. You're such a disappointment, was spiraling. His biggest client had dropped him out of nowhere. Half of his company's income? Gone overnight. I sipped my coffee, feeling nothing. No joy, no revenge, no anger, just silence. It wasn't satisfying like I thought it would be. It didn't fill me with any sense of, finally, they're getting what they deserve. It just was a mess, a slow-motion implosion that I could see coming years ago but no one else wanted to admit. Then Marissa pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. Texts from my mom, a whole chain of them. "Please tell Ian we need to talk. This isn't funny anymore. His father's health is suffering from the stress. If he's still angry about dinner, he needs to grow up. Family helps each other." That last one actually made me laugh out loud. Right there in the cafe. Got a few weird looks. Because where was all this family helps family energy when I was going through my divorce? When I was sleeping on a friend's couch for 3 months after losing my apartment? When my car broke down and I asked for a small loan to fix it, and they told me to be more responsible like Paul? Marissa didn't push me to call them. She just thought I should know. That's what I appreciated most. She gave me the truth. And the choice. Apparently, Paul had suddenly remembered I was good with tech and had started asking about my little online business. He even floated the idea of maybe Ian could help me out. The gall. I walked Marissa to her car. She gave me a hug before leaving and said, "I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself." The first time anyone in my family had ever said those words to me. That night, I went home and made a pros and cons list about reconnecting with them. The cons list? 2 pages long. The pros list? Completely blank. So I kept doing what I'd been doing. Nothing. And it felt more powerful than anything I'd ever said. Cereal aisle showdown. It was a random Tuesday. I was doing the most boring thing imaginable, grabbing groceries. I had one earbud in, mentally running through a checklist in my head. Bread, eggs, oat milk, something quick for dinner. I turned the corner into the cereal aisle and boom, I nearly crashed carts with him. My father. He looked older, not just in the way time ages someone, but in the way regret does. His hair was grayer, his shoulders hunched, like the world had been sitting on him a little too long. His cart was half full of the cheapest stuff in the store, generic brand everything. Instant noodles, bulk bread, and for a fleeting second, I felt something close to pity. Then he opened his mouth. "You're being childish. You need to man up and help your family." Just like that, whatever pity I felt evaporated. He hadn't changed, not really. He still thought guilt was a language we both spoke. I didn't say a word, just stared at him, waiting for whatever speech he had memorized. When silence didn't work, he changed tactics. "Your mom and I miss you so much. It's been hard without you. We were wrong to say those things. But there it was. Say those things. Not do those things. Not hurt you. Not we're sorry." Finally, he got to the point. "We need a loan. $50,000. I blinked. 50,000. This was the same man who, 3 months ago, called me a pathetic excuse for a son in front of the entire family. The same man who laughed as I was humiliated at a dinner table. And now, he was asking me, no, expecting me, to throw him a lifeline. I let that sink in for a moment. Then I said, calmly, I don't have that kind of money to lend anyone. He scoffed. We know about your little internet business. Like it was some underground empire. It's literally just a small Etsy store that barely covers groceries some weeks. Then he said the one phrase that made me feel like I was 16 again. Family comes first. I looked him right in the eye and replied, no, it doesn't. And then I walked away. Left my cart there, half filled with stuff I didn't need anymore, and walked out of the store without looking back. Was it petty? Maybe. Was it satisfying? Absolutely. Desperation in disguise. After that run-in at the grocery store, things started to escalate. Fast. The next morning, I got a voicemail on my work phone, from my mother. Her voice was trembling, soaked in tears. She went on about how this family is falling apart. How my silence is breaking her heart. Said she prayed about it. Said she woke up in the middle of the night feeling me pulling away. Right, because now I'm her emotional compass. Then Paul showed up at my gym. No idea how he found out where I work out. Maybe through mutuals or old Instagram stories, but there he was. Waiting near the water fountain like we were in some kind of after-school special. He didn't say much, just stood there awkwardly and said, "Can we talk?" I didn't answer, just kept walking. Then came the final straw. My ex-wife messaged me on Facebook. Said my father had reached out to her asking for my new address. My ex-wife. The same woman they all blamed for the divorce. The same woman they once called a temporary phase. I felt my chest tighten, not with fear, but disbelief. They weren't just desperate anymore. They were shameless. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail. Real paper, thick envelope, my name on it in handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a kid. Inside was an invitation to a family meeting. Location: my parents' house. Time: Saturday, 3 p.m. Tone: oddly formal, almost corporate. And at the bottom, written like the closing line of a business pitch, "We have a proposition that will benefit all parties involved." I stared at that line for a long time. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I didn't tear it up. I just sat there, letting it settle in my chest like dust on old furniture. They weren't looking for reconciliation. They were trying to cut a deal. And the craziest part? I was curious. Not because I wanted to help them, but because I wanted to know what they thought they still had left to bargain with. For once, I was holding the cards. While they imploded, I reclaimed my peace. Out there in the woods, with nothing but a leaky tent, stiff winds, and instant coffee that tasted like regret, I felt human again. No noise, no judgment, no expectations. I watched the fire crackle beneath a sky full of stars that didn't care what kind of sun I was. What I had or hadn't done. The silence didn't ask me for 50 grand. It didn't bring up old failures or compare me to Paul. It just let me be. When I got home 2 days later and turned my phone back on, it was like stepping into a digital war zone. 15 missed calls, 7 voicemails, messages from unknown numbers. The spectrum ranged from, "Please, just talk to us," my mother, tearful, to, "You're being ridiculous. Grow up," my father, threatening. And then, one message from Marissa, "Call me, Paul got fired." I nearly dropped my phone. Called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. Her voice already filled with a kind of disbelief that only comes from watching a train wreck up close. Turns out, Paul hadn't just mishandled funds at work. He'd been using company resources for personal expenses. He tried to cover his tracks when they couldn't reach me for a bailout. And, shocker, it only made things worse. Not only was he fired, but legal trouble might be on the horizon. I didn't gloat. I didn't even smile. I felt weirdly detached. Not numb, exactly, just clear. Then came the real bombshell. 3 days later, 6 a.m. doorbell rings. I'm groggy, still in pajama pants, expecting maybe a package or a neighbor needing something. I open the door, and there they are. All of them. Mom, Dad, Paul, even my sister. They looked like ghosts, hollow-eyed, defeated. Dad's face was red and puffy. Mom's mascara had surrendered to her cheeks. Paul looked like he hadn't shaved in days, wearing the same hoodie I saw him post on Instagram 4 days ago. And my sister, she just looked tired. Not physically, soul tired. I didn't invite them in. Just stepped outside and shut the door behind me. "What do you want?" I asked flatly. Dad wasted no time. "We need help." He launched into this speech about family unity, blood ties, how life throws curveballs, and how we need to stick together now more than ever. Mom kept trying to hug me, talking over herself about how hard it had been to track me down. Paul stood there like a guilty kid caught stealing cookies. barely looking up. And then, the truth spilled out. Dad's business? Crumbling. His suppliers demanded payment up front now. His credit was shot. They'd taken out a second mortgage on the house. 12 maxed out credit cards. Paul was being sued by his former employer. My sister's husband lost his job and moved their whole family back into my parents' house. And Caitlin? She dumped Paul publicly on Instagram, tagging everyone and laying out the whole mess in the caption like a breakup exposé. Their world? Gone. Imploded. Ashes. Dad got down on his knees, literally, right there on my porch and begged me to help. We just need $100. Please, you're our only chance. And for the first time in my life, I didn't panic. 3 months ago, I would have scrambled to fix it. Would have sold my car, maxed out my own cards, done whatever I could to keep their world afloat. But this time, I just asked one question. Why would I help the people who humiliated me and called me a failure? Silence. Then Mom burst into tears, crying, "We didn't mean it, Ian, we were just angry." Dad muttered something about, "just joking around." Paul finally looked at me and said, "We'll make it up to you. Man, we swear." But not one of them said the words that actually mattered. Not one of them said, "I'm sorry." Just a whole lot of, "We didn't mean it." And, "You're overreacting." And, "You have to forgive us." I told them I'd think about it. Then I asked them to leave. They hesitated, but eventually shuffled back to Mom's SUV, which, by the way, they're 3 payments behind on. I closed the door, made myself a cup of coffee, and called my therapist. My terms, or nothing at all. My therapist picked up right away. We talked for almost an hour. She didn't tell me what to do. She never does. Instead, she asked questions, the kind that make you pause, make you dig into places you usually keep locked up. By the end of the call, I knew exactly what I was going to do. Help? Maybe. But not like before. Not at the cost of my own peace. So the next day, I invited my father over. Just him. When he walked into my apartment, small, quiet, still with a leaky faucet and a wobbly kitchen table, you'd think he was walking into a bank vault. His eyes lit up like the cash was already on the table. But there was no cash. I sat him down, looked him dead in the eye, and gave him my terms. A formal, written apology, from every single person who was at that dinner. Not vague, not, "Sorry you felt hurt." I wanted them to write exactly what they said and take ownership. Mandatory family therapy, 6 months. Minimum, no skipping, no excuses, non-negotiable. My mom gets help for her spending addiction. Not just empty promises, real help. Paul takes responsibility for his financial and legal mess without dragging everyone else down with him. No large sums of money. I'd help them create a debt strategy, a payment plan, a budget, but I wasn't giving anyone a blank check. Not now, not ever. As I finished reading the list, I watched his face go through about 17 emotions in 30 seconds: confusion, offense, disbelief, anger, desperation. "You're being unreasonable," he finally said. "Family doesn't put conditions on helping each other." I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. "Then I guess we're not family." He left. 2 days later, Marissa texted me a screenshot. My mom had posted a Facebook rant titled, "Ungrateful Children. When they forget where they came from." Classic. Make herself the victim. Act like I'm the villain for setting boundaries. But then, something unexpected. My sister called. We hadn't spoken one-on-one since the engagement dinner. Her voice cracked on the second word. She said she couldn't take it anymore, living with our parents. The toxic tension, the kids picking up on the chaos. And then she said something no one in my family had ever said to me. "I'm sorry, I should have stood up for you that night." I invited her over for dinner. It wasn't fancy, just takeout, some soda, and my creaky table. After the kids fell asleep in the spare room, we sat and talked for hours. She admitted she'd played along with the "Ian is the failure" narrative for years, because it kept the spotlight off her own struggles. Her marriage was falling apart. Her husband had been lying about money. And she'd been trying to hold together a facade that was crumbling faster than Paul's Instagram perfect life. By the end of the night, we had a plan. I helped her find a small apartment, paid the security deposit, the only actual money I've given anyone in the family. I helped her husband rewrite his resume and prep for interviews. She agreed to therapy, promised to start learning how to set boundaries of her own. It was the first time I saw someone in my family actually want to change, not just say it. A week later, I got an email from Paul. No apology, just a subject line, "Job application." Attached was his resume and a note asking if I could put in a good word for him at my job. I didn't respond. And then, one last twist. The apology I never thought I'd hear. It was a quiet Thursday morning. Overcast sky, a slight chill in the air. I was halfway through making toast when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door, and there he was. My father. But this time, he wasn't puffed up with pride or frustration. He wasn't barking orders or slinging guilt like a weapon. He looked small, like someone who'd finally run out of excuses. He stood on my doorstep in the same clothes from last week's Facebook photos. Hands trembling slightly, shoulders slumped like a man carrying more weight than he knew how to hold. "Can I come in?" I didn't say anything, just stepped aside. He sat at my kitchen table, still wobbly, still unfixed. I didn't offer coffee, didn't need to. The air between us was heavy enough. Then, for the first time in my entire life, my father looked me in the eye and apologized. Not the half-baked kind. Not a, "sorry if you felt that way," or a, "you know how I get when I've been drinking." No. He said, "Ian, I've been a bad father. I treated you like you were always less than Paul. I let my pride, my fear, and my own failures turn you into a scapegoat." He told me he used to envy how easily things came to Paul and how, instead of addressing that, he projected all of his pressure and unfulfilled dreams onto me. Said he'd failed to protect me from mom's cruelty. That he'd laughed at me because it was easier than facing his own guilt. I was wrong about everything, he said quietly. And for the first time, I believed him. He didn't ask for money this time. Didn't bring a proposal or a plan or an angle. He just asked one thing. "Are your terms still on the table?" I nodded. "They haven't changed." He agreed to all of it. The apologies, the therapy, the accountability. No more pretending, no more sweeping things under the rug. If we were going to try and rebuild anything resembling a relationship, it was going to be honest, ugly, and slow, just like healing is supposed to be. The end of one story. The beginning of mine. We started therapy the following week. Not everyone was thrilled. My mom insisted she was too busy, though no one can quite say doing what. Since she's not working. Paul showed up with arms crossed and a face like someone being forced into detention. But they came, and that alone was something. My sister and her family? They're doing better. Their new apartment isn't fancy, but it's safe, quiet, hers. She told me the kids are sleeping better now that they're not hearing arguments through the walls. Her husband landed a part-time gig. It's not much, but it's a start. And as for me, I still have that leaky faucet. The table still wobbles when I set down my coffee. My Etsy store isn't some $1 million empire. It barely covers my rent most months. But it's mine. This piece I've carved out? It's mine. For the first time in my life. I'm not bending myself into a shape that fits their expectations. I'm not the failure twin. I'm not the family punchline. I'm not their fallback plan. I'm just Ian, a guy who learned the hard way that blood doesn't entitle anyone to your peace. That healing doesn't come from apologies whispered too late, or promises made in desperation. It comes from standing up, walking away from a table that mocks your presence, and deciding, for the first time ever, that you deserve better. And maybe the family I grew up with won't ever fully understand that. But the man I've become? He does. The house with the leaky faucet. Sometimes, when I can't sleep, I'll sit at my kitchen table, still a little crooked, and just listen. To the hum of the fridge. The slow drip of the faucet. The quiet, living silence of a place that finally feels like mine. And I think about how far I've come. There was a time when every word I spoke was edited in my head before it left my mouth. When every visit home felt like walking into a test I never studied for. When I thought love meant shrinking yourself small enough to fit in someone else's definition of worthy. But now I understand something I wish I had known 20 years ago. Being related doesn't mean being owed. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And family doesn't get to define you. They still slip sometimes. Paul still complains during therapy. Mom still thinks this is all some overreaction. Dad tries to take the lead even when he shouldn't. But they're showing up. And so am I. On my terms. I don't know if we'll ever be close. I don't know if they'll ever fully understand what they did to me. Or how long it took me to climb out of that shadow. But I do know this. I'm not going back to the version of me that needed their approval to feel whole. The man who walked away from that dinner table didn't just leave his family behind. He left behind every story they ever wrote for him. Every nickname, every jab, every eye roll, every comparison. And the man who stands in his place? He's building something new. Maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it leaks. Maybe the furniture wobbles. But it's steady. It's real. And it's mine. Final thoughts. From failure to freedom. It's strange. Really. I spent most of my life thinking I had to earn love. That I had to win it. Perform for it. Be more like Paul. Talk less. Take the joke. Shrink smaller. Smile through it. But the truth? You don't have to earn basic respect. You don't have to bleed to keep other people comfortable. And the people who love you should never make you feel like you're only valuable when you're useful to them. That dinner? That was the best thing that ever happened to me. It cracked the illusion wide open. It didn't just hurt, it revealed. Revealed who they were. Revealed who I had become just to survive. And more importantly, who I wanted to become next. I'm still figuring it out. I still have off days. Sometimes I catch myself almost slipping back into that old role, the quiet one. The forgotten one, the fixer. But then I remember. I don't live in that story anymore. I rewrote it. Page by page. Line by line. Now I wake up without that tight feeling in my chest. I walk into my apartment and it feels like home. I laugh, genuinely, freely, with people who see me as more than someone's shadow. And if you're out there listening, maybe stuck in a family dynamic that makes you feel invisible or less than or broken, let me tell you something. You're not the failure. You're just stuck in the wrong story. So write a new one. Even if it's slow. Even if it leaks. Even if the table wobbles. It'll still be yours. And trust me, there's nothing more powerful than that. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your friends. And subscribe for more real-life family dramas. Let me know in the comments what you think about today's story. Was it fair or totally messed up? See you in the next one.